It's open season for new magazines here on The Stack. We're serving doubles for you with a new title about tennis, and a dating app is going analog with a print publication about sex and relationships. Enjoy the show. From Midori House in London, this is The Stack, 30 minutes of print industry analysis, and I am Fernando Augusto Pacheco. We start the show with a very interesting story. Dating app Feud, aimed at the emotionally, physically, and intellectually curious, has just published the first issue of a new magazine. It's called AFM. And of course explores issues around sex and relationships. The inaugural issue is themed around pursuits of happiness, with contributors including Bruce LaBruce, Susanna Moore, and more. I had the pleasure to welcome to our studio the CEO of Feud, Anna Kirova, and the co-editor of AFM, Maria Dimitrova.
Feud, it's a dating app for the curious. It's for people who are open to experiencing relationships and really people, other people, and themselves in new ways. It was founded in 2014 by my partner, Dimo. We wanted to explore our relationship and wanted to date as a couple, but we were met with a lot of rejection. So Dimo founded Feud, and it turned out that there are a lot of people like us who wanted to date outside of prescribed structures and to challenge really existing relationship models and blueprints. And we're all about rewriting the script of how we build intimacy in relationships. It's why we've always offered different options for how people express themselves on the platform. We've explored different models and different formats to allow people different ways to find out more about themselves and about each other. And I think a fucking magazine is one of those.
Is there two names, by the way?
It
can be both, right?
It can be both. It can be both, yeah. It's a fucking magazine or a field magazine. I can't wait to pass over to Maria in a bit because she has a lot to say about this and she's the mind that's driving this. But I think that's like having a print magazine, something tactile, something tangible, something that people can experience in a really intimate and personal way, has been really an extension of our perspective and the way that we see how we can build relationships with each other, with our surroundings, with ourselves. It's really through intention, through creativity, and through sincere curiosity and openness. So the hope is that we're bringing this new format for people to interact with different worlds and with different worldviews.
Well, now finding out a bit more about Feud, it almost makes sense that you have a magazine which is exploring sexuality, exploring this curiosity you're talking about. Maria, I want to hear more. You are the editor of the magazine. How did you knew about Feud before? Was it something new? How did you and Anna discuss this? And then I wonder if you can also introduce the magazine for us.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to. First, I'll start by saying I'm the co-editor of AFM. My co-editor is Haley Malotek, who's a fantastic writer and editor in her own right. And so much of the magazine is was a dialogue between us, I would say, and like us kind of really taking this incredible kind of brief and idea and coming up with what people would hold in their hands very soon. But I have been associated with Feud. I've worked with Feud for many years. I've looked after the way I can kind of explain my role. I'm the director of content right now, as well as co-editor of AFM. But I've looked after all things language, editorial, copy for a few years. I got involved with Feud. I met Anna and Dimo years ago. And the first editorial project I worked on was a literary magazine called Mao Journal, which ran for 5 issues. It launched in 2018. And it was there's similarities. There's definitely if anyone who knows Mao can see it could make sense that AFM has come out of that and some of that thinking, but it was much more of a literary journal, and the focus was on creating meaningful kind of collaborations with cultural institutions. We launched the Institute of Contemporary Art with our first issue contributors, Anne Boyer, Julia Jakes, Saskia Vogo, who are all incredible voices, especially in the field of relationships, of desire. And looked at in a way that is not literal. It's not what people think of when they think of sex writing or when they think about a magazine of eroticism or sexuality. It really went beyond that. Mao really tried to kind of belong to and speak to a long lineage of writing about sexuality and relationships and the erotic that has existed for a very long time, but maybe people just don't think of it that way. I think in our first, just a little kind of snippet, but I remember Anna and I were kind of creating a kind of mock-up before the first issue of Mao, but the first time we collaborated editorially, and the names, like the kind of example names, sort of dream list you have, where like people like James Baldwin, Juna Barnes, Audre Lorde, like this is sort of what we aspired to do with Mao and to find the contemporary version of that. And then Mao kind of ran, it had its kind of trajectory. It existed at a very different time of the company. It did so many other partnerships with institutions in its life. And then the company kind of had a change sort of around COVID. Every company, I think, had a moment of reflection, of sort of a pause. One thing that came out of that is we did an enormous amount of member research. And Anna mentioned this, something that came out is we found that there's an enormous amount of people who are creatives or in creative jobs who read, who also, when we read interviews and looked at interviews with members, they spoke in this extremely vivid way. People spoke in these very rich and vivid ways about their experience, about their relationships, about the changes they went on at Field. And it just was incredibly rich ground for making sure we feature their voices. We actually create a magazine, we create a platform where we can not just create content that is thematically relevant, but also have a lot of people on Field as authors. So one thing about AFM, to introduce it, AFM, a fucking magazine / a Field magazine, is a magazine about sexuality and relationships that has at least 50% of its contributors on Field.
Can I call it a sensuous encyclopedia? I read in the press release and I love that.
You can call it that. I like that a lot. Something that is different about AFM, and I really can't wait for people to hold it in their hands. It's a beautiful object. It's an object that is really trying to bring back a bit of that romance of print, romance of editorial work. You can read the title of the magazine in many different ways, and that is very deliberate. But one way is really just, as we say in the editor's letter, there is an element of desire inherent to editorial work that mirrors the experience of desire that the magazine is about.
And Anna, I want to ask you as well, the magazine, I have a feeling that a lot of Field customers or users, they will be interested in that, but perhaps are you trying to reach a different market as well? Perhaps people that maybe are not in the app, but they like a beautiful print product and they want to read more about those topics that Maria was just saying.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think one of the reasons we have kept that balance that Maria mentioned, half of the contributors are part of our community, our Field members, and half are not, are exactly to provide a platform to express and explore these topics and these themes in a really vivid way with perspectives that are probably not really from our universe, like not from the Field's universe that much, but still exist in that same world of openness and exploration. I do think there is a need for... So one of the things that I find very exciting about this is the privacy of experiencing print and the intimacy that it brings to that relationship between the writer, the contributor, the creator, and the person who is interacting with that object, with that piece of content. And because it's in print, it's in your hand, it's really... There's something really special about that because there's something finite because it's done. There is a lot of intention that was put behind it, a lot of care. And I think there's something very, as Maria mentioned too, like romantic about that interaction. And I do believe that we will reach people who are not a part of the Field community, but are interested in a lot of the topics that we interact with on a daily basis. But I would say it's not been our intention to expand our reach or anything like that. We just wanted to put something like this out there in the world with a lot of care.
And before I ask Maria, because there's amazing contributors for the first issue, but in which markets are Field present? Do you have specific markets where Field is actually quite strong? And I wonder, just out of curiosity.
Our biggest markets are the US, the UK. We have some countries, Australia as well. We have some countries in Europe like Germany, the Netherlands, where we're quite popular. But we are available in many parts of the world. But those are our peak, like biggest markets.
Amazing. Maria, I want to talk more about issue 1. Let's talk about the names. It's incredible. You have people like Bruce LaBruce there. I wonder if you can give us like a snippet of some of the articles, or what can people actually expect from the first issue?
The magazine offers so many different entry points. So some people will come through the fiction, or through, knowing Bruce LaBruce's work, or through knowing one of our wonderful fiction writers or poets. Our hope is that anyone who comes into something familiar discovers something unknown and unfamiliar, something that is really, a bit surprising, maybe a bit provocative. But to give you an overview, the magazine itself includes conversations and interviews with creatives, with writers, with filmmakers. There's actually seems to be quite a strong film team. Some of the conversations are with, as you said, Bruce LaBruce, who is a fantastic filmmaker and artist based in Canada, who has so much to say about sexuality. We have Susanna Moore, the author of the iconic In the Cut, interviewed in conversation with Alison P. Davis, the New York Magazine writer and author. We have conversations with our cover star, Juliana Huxtable. Many people know her. She's an incredible example of someone who does so many different things, and people know her through different facets of her work. She's an artist, a DJ, a musician, a longtime field member. And then the magazine, aside from that, features similar content to Mao in terms of publishing short stories, publishing poetry, publishing essays. We have an incredible essay by Mary Tiers, who is a novelist and screenwriter, who wrote like this kind of, we call it like a timeline poem almost, about like trying to make an abortion show in Hollywood against like the kind of stripping back of reproductive rights and what it took. And it's an incredible piece of writing. We have a memoir piece by the legendary filmmaker James Ivory from Merchant Ivory, who wrote a little bit about a kind of a coming of age from his early trips in Palm Springs. We have an incredible essay by the kind of legendary New York media figure Daphne Merkin on the erotics of unhappiness, which again shows you a little bit of that like duality we want to have. The issue theme is called Pursuits of Happiness, but unhappiness is part of happiness too. So that there is definitely something that people will find throughout the issue in terms of looking at very different ways of engaging with the topics.
An observation for both of you. I don't know, maybe you might disagree with me, but I think the world is becoming increasingly prudish. I kind of find dealing with sexuality or reading about it, I think having a magazine is such a great way, because when you go to social media, there's so much shouting and people, I disagree with you, and it's not complex enough. And I think a magazine gives this space to breathe. What would you say to that, Anna?
It's a really perceptive statement, I would say. I would agree. I think what Maria and Haley have done, for example, with AFM, is they've curated and have explored finding voices that can provide really in-depth and different perspective on sexuality, on relationships, on navigating identity, on the erotic, on the sensual, and the opposites. And I think in our day and time, sometimes we tend to rush to explain everything. I think there's some things about the human condition that can be experienced, can be maybe expressed with art, with poetry, with words, but not necessarily explained and kind of digested for you. Technology is incredible for providing us different ways to communicate, to learn, to grow, but it has its limitations sometimes. It has its place, it has its time. There is a reason why print has existed for so long, still does, continues to thrive in many ways. It is because of that. It's such a different process, developing an app and developing an artifact like a print magazine, and wanting to do both really well. They're entirely different flows, considerations. And I think the curation here that's happened by Maria and Haley has been with that intent to give room, to give air, to give space for different expressions, not to explain to people how they should be or how they should, what they should do, but to show ways of being, ways of doing, and then give people that freedom and permission to explore their own views.
Amazing. Maria, I just want to ask you a quick question for our magazine fanatics, people that are listening, because I know there's been one title, I believe, from the 60s, one from the 80s that, they were one of the sources of inspiration for AFM, right? I wonder if you can mention that.
There's quite a few. I'll actually start by something we haven't discussed, but it is fun, and it speaks to a lot of what Anna was saying about the generally non-prescriptive nature of anything Field does and the philosophy at the center of Field, and it is the AFM really stems out of that. For a long time, the working title was Mixed Feelings, which should really give you a really good sense of what. And it really fit. The other thing could have been that. In the end, we went with a fucking magazine which had more intention and kind of fierceness, but similar duality, similar different ways of reading it, which again is very Field. We in the end went with the initial title AFM, inspired by the beautiful French art magazine FMR, which I wasn't sure about. And then when I saw the masthead, it was in fact my partner who showed it to me. And it's just really, I could really see it. I could see AFM, even though it's a very different type of magazine. What it did with print, it was one of the most beautiful publications in that genre. Was definitely an inspiration and gave us like extra reassurance to go down the AFM route rather than try and find something like Mixed Feelings. And then another reassurance that came through our poetry editor, Catherine Maris, who pointed out to me that there was a 60s art journal called Fuck You, a Magazine. And they published incredible like avant-garde poets, writers. At the time, it was very playful, but also very good. It was like extremely good content. So I was like, well, this is not even that shocking. It's not even that new. And we went with it. But we do like, again, we like that fact that you can read it with so many different tones and voices, and it all stands.
Thank you very much, both Anna and Maria. The first issue of AFM is out now. For more information, go to field.co/magazine. And finally on the show, we welcome back David Shaftel, former Racket magazine, to talk about his new tennis media company, The Second Serve, which also has a print publication, of course, the large format and photography-led Open Tennis. David tells me how the new title would sit among the tennis press.
The Second Serve is a digital-first independent tennis media outlet, if I can give you a wordy definition of it. But, we have a website where we cover professional tennis, and our coverage is delivered to you every Friday in a newsletter. But we also, of course, have a print magazine. The website launched in January at the Australian Open. And our first print edition, which is called Open Tennis, was out for the US Open in August. So it's going to, the print magazine is going to be twice a year. The first edition, I think, is 112 pages. I hope to add pages for the second one, large format, a lot of photography.
That's one thing that became quite apparent. It is very photography based and the format is large. So, it is still about tennis, which I know you do well. You, of course, with your work at Racket, but it does feel different as a magazine.
Well, thank you. I wanted it to. I think large format really wants to be full of photographs and great original photography. And that's also just an interest of mine, commissioning great photo shoots, working with photographers. It's just something I really enjoy. So I'm leaning into that with the big format. And the other thing I'll say about this magazine is that it really covers pro tennis head on in a way that I haven't done in the past. So the idea of the magazine is that it's really going to focus on tennis, obviously art, travel, fashion, photography, and we say ideas as well, because I want to continue to showcase great writing. But those areas, I think fashion and travel especially, are underserved in tennis. So I wanted to really shine a light on those two areas. I don't think tennis is done really well as far as the travel goes. I think golf has done really well as positioning itself as a sport that you travel to do. You go to hotels in Europe and you have the Golf Channel and CNN Golf, and there's several golf magazines. And I think tennis has the same opportunities, but it hasn't really done that very well. So that was one thing I wanted to do. Fashion, same thing. Coverage is sort of here and there. So I wanted to localize that here. And of course, art, which is something that I always have been interested in and showcased a lot in my previous magazines. So I wanted to continue with that, obviously, here as well.
Well, I'm talking about art. One of the covers, the limited edition, is beautiful. There are two covers. Both of them are beautiful. One with Anna Kalinskaya, and the second one is beautiful. Like, I wonder if you could describe it.
Sure. So, wanted to do two covers. I really couldn't decide whether I felt the magazine needed a pro player on the cover, and I think that'll be true going forward. But I felt a little sad I couldn't showcase art, and I was sort of thinking maybe I'll alternate tennis player art, and then I said, well, why don't I just do both? And of course, we made the artist cover a limited edition magazine, which actually did really well. They sold out really quickly, which was a nice surprise. But it's by an artist called Ethan Cook, who, his work they look like paintings, at first glance. But what he does is he actually makes paper and, makes these sort of collage-like works out of paper that he makes and sews them onto canvas that he also makes. So the one, and he's someone I play tennis with, so we had a lot of conversations about what we could do. And yeah, this one's very simple. It's just, he made 4 pieces of paper in the colors of the Grand Slam tennis court. So Australian Open, French Open, US Open, and Wimbledon, of course. So you see just these very simple blocks of those 4 colors, simple but effective, I think. And looking at his work, I just saw it on a cover. It's just very arresting, but very simple, which are, I love simple design, eye-catching colors, and that sort of had it all for me. So, sometimes the way to go is something very, very simple. And of course, the other cover is Anna Kalinskaya, who's, I don't know, she's maybe 15 in the world right now, Russian player. Although her game is very impressive, she made news lately for dating Yannick Sinner, world number 1. But she was shot in London at Wimbledon by a photographer called Dan Martinson. Very straightforward, but beautiful fashion shoot. But the picture I chose for the cover is a little bit esoteric, a little spooky even. It's another one that I just sort of saw in my head as a great cover and love the interaction of a black and white photo and a bright yellow masthead.
I love the black and white with yellow. It worked so well.
Yeah, I mean, I've done it a few times in the past, either black and white and yellow or just black and white covers. I never seem to remember how difficult they are to print, the paper taking on all those blacks, getting the contrast, preserving all the information. So it was a little tricky to print that cover, but I went to press and we made some adjustments and tweaked the yellow a bit and all those kind of things, and quite happy with the result.
And I love how playful you were as well. I know it's your project. I love this kind of little poster that comes inside the magazine for those who are interested to buy a copy. It's from Japan. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about this idea and how you wanted to incorporate this to the title.
Well, this first edition is saddle stitched. When we add pages, we'll have to perfect bind the magazine. I think we're at the outer limits of what you can get a staple through. But that saddle stitching really lends itself to having something blown into or inserted into the magazine. Because the magazine is so photography driven, I really didn't want to break that up with 12 or 16 pages of hand-drawn illustrations, which are on the poster you're referring to, which, because we haven't described it, is an artist called Andrew Hermida, goes by the name Herm. His specialty is all kinds of drawing, but live drawing, sporting events. I actually met him at a design review, an SPD design review, and he revealed to me that his last project was drawing every New York Mets home game, the baseball team, for your English listeners. And I'm a big Mets fan, and I was like, all right, you're hired, we're friends. So he lives in Japan. He went to the Tokyo Open and drew what he saw there. So as I was saying, I didn't want to break up all this photography with all that illustration, and I thought an insert would be fun. We actually tried it as a booklet, the same size, but as a saddle-stitched booklet. And it just didn't work as well as the poster. And actually, we were talking about a colleague and friend before we were on the air, Josh Hickey, who does the great Journal of the Hydra book club. And he actually had a poster insert in their first edition. And when I saw that, you'll be hearing this for the first time, but when I saw that, I was like, oh, no, this is the way to go. It's got to fold out like a poster. So I kind of stole his idea there.
I was glad to see Josh as well in the magazine. So there was an interesting combination there of Hydra and tennis, right?
Yeah, I mean that was such a fun shoot, and so it's a group of friends, many of whom are quite renowned artists who live on Hydra, and it's a fashion photo shoot where they travel by boat to a tennis court, play some tennis, have a good time afterwards. it's a lovely, I've never been, it's a lovely looking island. The photo shoot is sunny and attractive and everybody looks great. And that was the first piece we designed, and we lived with that piece for like 3 or 4 weeks. So I kind of feel like I spent my summer with those people on Hydra, despite the fact that I've never been.
I've never been, but I really need to go. But David, and perhaps, finally, open tennis, and of course your project, The Second Serve, what were your main intentions to bring to the tennis press, which I know, you've been working with other magazines as well, but this is something that you feel like perhaps it was missing. You mentioned there that you wanted to connect the world of tennis more with art, with travel, with other things. Is that perhaps what you wanted to bring to the table there among the world of tennis press?
Yeah, well, editorially, I wanted to do everything. So on the website, we're covering pro tennis, less at the moment, less from a breaking news or results standpoint, but kind of as, magazine features or more feature stories than results-based stories. I still want our coverage to be an easy way in for people that want to get into tennis, create a space for people who are interested in the sport, but might feel alienated by playing it or following, this quite rigorous, intense, and complicated tennis schedule. So we wanted to provide a way in for new fans, but also have the coverage be good enough, and I think it is, that hardcore fans will get something out of it as well. Covering tennis sort of head on the website, it left a gap, a sort of vacancy for me. Obviously wanted to do something in print and do something, very, very visual, slightly more esoteric, so I can do that in open tennis in the magazine. And, like I said, cover these aspects of the lifestyle side of tennis that I think are underserved. But whereas my work previously, I think, was using tennis as a lens to look at the wider world. So tennis was the way in for me, but then you could go off to any of these other weird places. I think open tennis and The Second Serve are a little more narrowly focused on tennis. I don't think I would take so many of those detours, but I think there's a place for it in tennis. I don't think, Tennis Magazine, there used to be many tennis magazines, but Tennis Magazine, the sort of long running one here in America, is gone now. It went out of print 2 or 3 years ago. So I think there's a void there for some more straightforward tennis and tennis lifestyle coverage that I hope we can provide.
Thank you very much, David. And issue 1 of Open Tennis is out now. For more information, go to thesecondserve.com. And that's it for this week's show. My thanks as ever to our editor, Jack Dewars. Any comments or queries, feel free to write to me, Fernando, at fb@monocle.com. And remember, we're back next week, of course. And meanwhile, you can listen to this episode and previous ones on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and more. You've been listening to The Stack. I'm Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Until next time, it's goodbye from me.